Hey everybody, Tony here with another edition in the Crosswalking tutorial video series. In this episode, we're going to talk about consistency and perseverance. God doesn't need my help. He doesn't need my abilities. He doesn't need my innovations. He doesn't need my personality. He doesn't need my loud voice. He doesn't need my 5.5 foot tall cross that says stop and talk. God doesn't need me. But God is the God of means. He uses his people in the proclamation of the gospel to accomplish his end, to save each and every person he has determined to save before the foundation of the world. God is a God of means. That being understood, that God doesn't need me, that God doesn't need anyone, doesn't negate the fact that God is a God of means. He has determined in his infinite wisdom and predetermined plan that he will use the proclamation of the gospel to draw people to himself. That being the God of means, he will use the proclamation of the gospel to save everyone he is predetermined to save from eternity past. How he uses us? Well, he uses us in different ways. He uses us according to the context of life in which he's placed us. He uses us according to the personalities he's given us. He uses us according to the gifting that he has given each of us. But he is the God of means. And so while, again, God doesn't need me to further his kingdom, he does use me, and he uses you too. So with all of that understood, we ought to be out there doing something, right? Whether it's distributing gospel tracts, or if you're a man sent out by your church to do so, preaching the gospel in the open air, or engaging people in conversation, or proclaiming the gospel in your term papers, or proclaiming the gospel to your children around the dining room table, or any one of a number of other ways, we ought to be doing something. And whatever it is that we do, consistency and perseverance are important. And that's certainly true when it comes to crosswalking. So let's start by getting one objection out of the way. Yeah, but Tony, you're a full-time evangelist. You're sent out by your church to be out on the street 5, 6, 7 days a week. To be out there, whether it's holding your cross or signs or distributing tracts or engaging people in conversation or being outside of the mortuary or open-air preaching outside of the farmer's market. Your church sends you out there to do that. That is your life. Well, certainly it's easier for you to be consistent and to persevere because that's what you do. Well, you don't have to be a full-time evangelist to be consistent in your evangelism. And you most certainly don't have to be a full-time evangelist to persevere in your evangelistic efforts. You can be consistent 1 lunch hour a week, where maybe you have a couple of signs that you keep in your car, you keep in the trunk, and you've committed to taking one of your lunch hours each week, and instead of downing a sandwich or a bowl of soup, you're going to head to a corner nearby work, and you're going to spend a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever your work has allotted you as far as your own personal time for lunch. And you're going to stand out there and wave at cars, or maybe you're just going to walk out of your office building and you're going to walk down the street to an area where a lot of people gather for lunch. You work in an office district, and there are some food carts down the street, and there are dozens of people out there during the lunch hour. And so you're going to go out there and you're going to distribute some tracts. Or maybe you're going to sit down next to a stranger for lunch. You're going to strike up a conversation with them and you're going to share the gospel. You can be consistent being a full-time employee somewhere else by simply taking one lunch hour a week. You can be consistent as a homeschool mom, as a stay-at-home mom with 1 kid, 2 kids, 10 kids. You can be consistent and persevering in your proclamation of the gospel to your children. You can be consistent in your public evangelism by making sure you have tracts in your pocket or in your purse, and you're ready when you're in the checkout line, wrangling the kids and putting the groceries on the counter to make sure that cashier gets a gospel tract. You can be consistent in your efforts. You can persevere in your efforts. You can do as Ray Comfort taught me. Instead of going to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk, you're going to go to the grocery store to do evangelism, and while you're there, you're going to buy a gallon of milk. Instead of going to the post office to mail a letter, you're going to go to the post office to engage in evangelism, and while you're there, you're going to mail a letter. Instead of taking your kids to the pediatrician for their physical, you're going to go to the pediatrician to engage in evangelism, and while you're there, you're going to get your kids checked out. You're going to go replace the tires on your car. But instead of replacing the tires on your car, you're going to go to the auto shop to engage in evangelism, and while you're there, you're going to get your tires changed or rotated. You can be consistent and persevering in your evangelism efforts without, as they say, ever quitting your day job. So you don't have to be a full-time evangelist to be consistent. You don't have to be a full-time evangelist to persevere in your evangelism efforts. You simply have to be a Christian who is consistent and persevering in your efforts. And with all of that understood, why then is consistency and perseverance important in crosswalking? Well, as I have mentioned many times before, I can't tell you how many times someone has stopped to talk to me. And the reason they stopped at that time, on that day, is because they've seen me out on the streets many times. They see me out at a particular time of day. They see me out at a particular corner. And each time they drive by, they've thought to themselves, you know what, I ought to stop and talk to him. I ought to stop and see what that guy's all about. And then today is the day when they stop to talk to me. And so a reason why I have so many conversations while crosswalking is because I am consistently out on the streets. I try to be out at about the same time of day. I try to focus on a short list of busy intersections so that as many different people, and at the same time the same people, see me in their mind day after day. And that spurs in some people a greater desire, a greater willingness to stop and talk to me. There are people who stop and talk to me who assume that I'm out at a particular corner from sunup to sundown. That's simply not true. There are days, depending on weather and conditions and life and what have you, there are days when I might be out 6 to 8 hours. And there are days when I might be on a corner an hour. I can't think of a time when I have been on a corner with my cross from sunup to sundown. But because I'm out consistently, some people assume that I'm out constantly. So that kind of consistency is helpful in this particular kind of ministry because it allows you to be seen regularly, and the more people see you, at least in some cases, the less crazy they're going to think you are, or the more comfortable they're going to be stopping to talk to you. Certainly, if during those times when they're passing by and they see you, that from time to time they see you standing there with your cross, and other times they see you standing there engaging someone in conversation. And so when they see other people stopping to talk to you, they feel more comfortable to stop and talk to you. So that kind of consistency matters. Consistency is helpful in this kind of ministry. Perseverance is important also. Now, in some respects, perseverance is somewhat synonymous with consistency. In order to be in any one place consistently, there is a level of perseverance that's involved in that, whether it's 5 days a week or 1 lunch hour a week or somewhere in between. But perseverance extends beyond consistency, in that this kind of street ministry really is a 4-season ministry, at least for me. When I lived in Southern California and I was doing this kind of ministry, well, we really only had 2 seasons, summer and fire. And it was relatively easy to be out on the streets 360 days a year because the weather was so nice. Here in eastern Iowa, I could experience 4 seasons in one day. And I certainly do experience them over the course of a year. And I try to be out, rain or shine, hot or cold. And the reason for that is not so that people will say, hey, look at him, he's standing in the snow. Or look at him, it's a driving rain. Wow, how impressive is that he's standing out there with his cross in the rain. It's not so that they will think more highly of me. It's that they will maybe think differently of the importance of the gospel. Not thinking that either I'm crazy or committed to be out there in all kinds of weather, but that they would see in me, in those efforts, that the message is really important to me, and that they're really important to me, that the people driving by are really important to me, and that I really do want them to stop and talk. And so that's why I try to persevere in all kinds of weather, in all kinds of conditions. That's why I try to persevere in part by being out there as many days of the week as I can, because I am speaking to the people who are driving by without ever saying a word to them. I am communicating something to them by being out there in the rain, by being out there in the snow, by being out there in 100-degree heat, by being out there when it's 30 degrees below zero. I'm hopefully communicating urgency to them. I'm hopefully communicating to them a level of sincerity and care for them. I'm hoping that I'm communicating to them a commitment to the task at hand. Right now I'm on my way back into town after a couple of hours of fishing. I got 2, maybe 3 bites. The couple hours I was there, didn't bring any fish. There's a reason why they call it fishing and not catching. And it probably wouldn't make sense if someone were to suggest that I actually didn't go fishing because I didn't catch anything. I was there with my tackle and bait, and I had a line in the water. I was working my bait, I was working a jig, I was working a bobber. It did get a few bites, didn't land any fish. But I was out at the lake fishing, even though I didn't catch anything. I started crosswalking about 12 years ago. And a dear friend of mine, dear friend to this day, when I made public this idea I had to write something on a cross and stand on a corner and wave at cars, he graciously and lovingly suggested that I wasn't actually engaged in evangelism because I wasn't communicating the gospel to anybody by standing there with a cross which at the time read, "Are you ready?" If a man stands up to open air preach and nobody hears the entirety of his message, maybe people hear bits and pieces of it, maybe he's stopped halfway through by the police, and maybe his amplifier dies and only a couple of people can hear bits and pieces of what he's saying. Should we tell that open air preacher he's not actually engaged in evangelism because no one heard the entirety of his message? Or the Christian who sticks gospel tracts in books at a bookstore or in 12 packs of beer at the grocery store. Should we suggest to them that they're not engaged in evangelism if nobody read those books or opened those books or found those gospel tracts? If someone is out engaging people in conversation and they try a number of times and they start several conversations, but before they can even get to the gospel, the people shut them down and walk away, refuse to take a gospel tract, should we suggest to that brother or sister that he or she wasn't engaged in evangelism because no one heard the entirety of the gospel message? I would say no. We shouldn't suggest that. Because Jesus called it fishing and not catching. Jesus said in Mark 1:17, "Come and follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." And so, being out there on a corner with a cross that says, "Are you ready?" or "Stop and talk," or whatever it might say, takes perseverance. You might go a day, you might go a week without someone stopping to get a gospel tract or a Bible, or without having a conversation with someone. You might then, as I've experienced, distribute a half a dozen Bibles to people in an hour's time, or have people actually lining up, albeit a short line, but people lining up to talk to you. You have to persevere. It's called fishing for men. God does the catching. So you need to persevere. You need to establish consistency in this kind of ministry, whether that's a day or every day, whether it's an entire afternoon or a lunch break, whether it's in the morning before you go to school or in the evening after you get off work. This kind of ministry requires some consistency. And it most certainly requires perseverance. You need to stick with it. You need to be patient. You need to be willing to go a day without talking to anybody. You need to try. As I often say, the only time we fail in evangelism is when we fail to evangelize. And I would include trying to evangelize in that definition of evangelism. So I hope this video has been encouraging to you. If you're already crosswalking and you're experiencing some discouragement because you're not having as many conversations as you like, or you're waiting for someone to stop and talk for the first time, hang in there. Stay consistent and persevere. And if you have started crosswalking, or if you've been doing it for a while, let me know in the comments section. Love to be an encouragement to you and be encouraged by you. So until next time, God bless and keep fishing.